For decades, people around the world were sold one of the most expensive illusions ever created. It came wrapped in luxury, covered in champagne, and decorated with images of elegance, power, and perfect living. That illusion was Monaco. Most people grew up seeing the same picture. James Bond walking calmly through the Monte Carlo casino. Endless rows of luxury yachts floating under the Mediterranean sun. Formula One cars screaming through narrow streets while billionaires watched from private balconies. Beautiful people in designer clothes laughing over expensive dinners beside the sea. Over time, Monaco stopped feeling like a real country. It became a symbol. To millions of people, it represented the highest level of success imaginable. The final destination for people who had won at life. A tiny paradise for the ultra-rich, separated from the problems of the normal world. But the reality behind that fantasy is far less glamorous. Monaco is not some peaceful Mediterranean dream. It's a tiny piece of rock covered in concrete, squeezed between mountains and the sea. The entire country is smaller than many city parks, yet it's packed with thousands of people trying to protect enormous fortunes behind luxury addresses and private bank accounts. The air here doesn't smell like freedom or fresh ocean breeze. It smells like traffic, fuel, construction dust, and anxiety. The famous yachts sit packed tightly together in the harbor. The streets are crowded with Ferraris and Lamborghinis, trapped in endless traffic jams. Tower after tower climbs aggressively up the hills because there's almost no space left to build. Every square meter feels expensive, controlled, and artificial. And the people living there are not searching for culture, peace, or beauty. Most of them came for one reason: money. More specifically, protecting money. That changes the entire atmosphere of the place. Monaco doesn't feel like a normal country. It feels like a giant luxury vault under open skies, a heavily guarded financial shelter where the world's wealthiest people hide from taxes, instability, and sometimes even from the rest of humanity itself. That's the strange contradiction at the center of Monaco. People imagine ultimate freedom when they think about billionaires. But Monaco often looks more like a golden cage, a place where rich people isolate themselves inside a tiny, overcrowded bubble built entirely around wealth, status, and fear of losing everything they own. The illusion starts falling apart the moment you spend real time inside Monaco. At first, everything looks exactly the way people imagine it. Luxury cars everywhere, perfect hotels, expensive watches behind spotless glass windows, billionaires eating dinner beside the harbor while yachts glow under the lights of Monte Carlo. But after a few days, something starts to feel wrong. The entire place feels too polished, too controlled, too artificial. You begin to notice that Monaco is constantly noisy. Helicopters fly overhead almost non-stop. Construction machines roar through the streets. Sports cars sit trapped in traffic, barely moving faster than pedestrians. The air feels heavy with exhaust fumes and heat bouncing off concrete towers. And slowly, you realize something important. Monaco was never designed for comfortable living. It was designed to protect money. That is the real center of the principality. Not beauty, not culture, not freedom. Money. Everything around you starts reflecting that reality. The city feels less like a Mediterranean paradise and more like a giant open-air safe deposit box. Cameras cover nearly every corner. Security guards stand everywhere. Police presence is constant. Every building feels protected, monitored, and controlled. But underneath that security is tension. The people living here do not look relaxed. They look cautious. Many of them spend their lives managing assets, avoiding taxes, protecting investments, and maintaining status. Their days revolve around lawyers, financial advisors, private bankers, and endless business conversations. The supposed dream lifestyle quickly turns into repetition. The same narrow streets, the same luxury restaurants, the same social circles, the same fake smiles and forced conversations about money, deals, and influence. Even the architecture starts feeling uncomfortable after a while. The towers stand packed tightly together, fighting for space on the cliffs above the sea. Balconies face directly into other balconies. Apartments worth tens of millions still feel cramped and boxed in. Privacy barely exists. You can spend a fortune and still feel trapped inside a concrete maze. That's when the myth truly begins to collapse. Because normal people imagine that unlimited wealth buys peace, space, and freedom. But Monaco often delivers the exact opposite. People pay absurd amounts of money to live compressed inside one of the most crowded luxury environments on Earth. And the city keeps expanding because it has no other choice. Developers dig into mountains. They build artificial land into the sea. Old buildings disappear, so new luxury towers can rise even higher. Monaco feels like a place physically struggling against its own limits. The result is strange. Behind all the luxury, there is very little calm. Behind all the security, there is constant fear. And behind the glamorous image sold to the world, Monaco starts looking less like the final reward for success and more like a pressure chamber for the ultra-rich. That realization hits hard, because once you see it clearly, the fantasy can't survive anymore. Monaco stops looking like paradise. It starts looking like a place where the modern obsession with wealth finally becomes impossible to hide. Monaco works as one giant metaphor for the modern world. It's not just a rich city beside the Mediterranean. It's what happens when money becomes the center of absolutely everything. Imagine a massive luxury aquarium. Inside the glass live the richest people on Earth. The water is clean. The lighting is perfect. Security is everywhere. Every detail is carefully controlled so the people inside feel protected, important, and special. But the longer you look at the aquarium, the stranger it becomes. Because the fish inside are no longer free. They only move in circles inside an artificial environment built entirely around comfort and control. That's Monaco. The billionaires living there believe they escaped the chaos of the outside world. They think they found a perfect refuge where money can protect them from taxes, crime, instability, politics, and even reality itself. But in the process, they created a sealed-off bubble where everyone constantly watches everyone else. The entire place runs on one obsession: protecting wealth. That obsession changes everything. Friendships become transactions. Conversations become negotiations. Relationships start feeling strategic instead of real. Trust slowly disappears because everyone suspects everyone else of wanting access to money, status, or influence. People smile constantly in Monaco, but very few seem genuinely relaxed. That's because the city doesn't feel like a normal human environment anymore. It feels like a financial survival bunker disguised as paradise. The world imagines billionaires living in complete freedom, but Monaco often looks like the opposite. The richer people become, the more afraid they seem. Afraid of losing money, afraid of being targeted, afraid of public exposure, afraid of the world outside their protected bubble. Fear becomes the real engine of the city. Everything is built around that fear. The surveillance cameras, the heavy police presence, the armored cars, the private security teams, the controlled streets, the luxury towers that resemble vertical fortresses. People arrive searching for peace, but end up living inside one of the most monitored luxury environments on the planet. And the strangest part is that they accept it willingly, because safety became more important than freedom. That's the core sickness hidden underneath Monaco's glamorous image. Money stopped being a tool for living better and became a tool for hiding from life itself. That's why the city feels emotionally empty despite all the luxury. Everything looks polished, expensive, and perfect, but very little feels alive. The atmosphere is sterile, controlled, almost clinical. Even nature feels artificial. The beaches are partially imported. Trees grow between concrete walls. The coastline is shaped by construction projects and private marinas. The sea itself is slowly being pushed back to create more space for luxury real estate. Everything natural is redesigned to serve wealth. But human life doesn't function well inside completely artificial environments. People need unpredictability. They need genuine connection. They need space, emotion, spontaneity, and purpose. Monaco tries to eliminate all discomfort, all chaos, and all uncertainty. But in doing so, it also removes many of the things that make life feel real. The city becomes emotionally flat. That's why so many residents look exhausted, despite living surrounded by unimaginable luxury. After a certain point, wealth stops creating excitement. The first Ferrari feels thrilling. The 10th one means nothing. The same happens with yachts, penthouses, watches, and private clubs. Eventually, excess destroys desire itself. And when that happens, people start searching for stronger distractions. More luxury, bigger purchases, more exclusive experiences. But the emptiness never fully disappears because the problem isn't material anymore. It's psychological. Monaco accidentally exposes one of the darkest truths about extreme wealth. Once money becomes limitless, many people lose their connection to normal human meaning. The city is filled with people who can buy almost anything except peace of mind. That's why Monaco often feels less like a celebration of success and more like a giant experiment in emotional isolation. A beautiful cage where the richest people on earth slowly detach themselves from ordinary life. And the deeper they disappear into that bubble, the harder it becomes to return to reality. Because the aquarium eventually changes the fish inside it. They stop remembering what freedom actually feels like. They become dependent on the glass walls, the controlled environment, and the constant protection around them. That's the real diagnosis hidden beneath Monaco's glamorous surface. It's not simply a playground for billionaires. It's a warning about what happens when wealth grows so powerful that it starts replacing humanity itself. The real problem with Monaco is not the yachts, the casinos, or the billionaires walking through Monte Carlo in designer clothes. The real problem is the system underneath all of it. Because behind the glamorous image exists a giant machine designed to attract, protect, and multiply global wealth at almost any cost. And that machine has been rotting from the inside for a very long time. Monaco presents itself as a sophisticated European state. But in reality, it functions more like a luxury financial shelter built on a tiny piece of rock beside the Mediterranean. Its entire economic model revolves around one thing: making rich people feel safe enough to move their money there. That changes everything. Most countries survive by producing something valuable for society: technology, manufacturing, medicine, energy, agriculture, scientific innovation, real industries that create something useful beyond money itself. Monaco produces almost none of that. Its main export is financial protection. The principality became famous because it offered wealthy people exactly what they wanted: low taxes, privacy, stability, and distance from the financial responsibilities they faced in their home countries. That attracted enormous fortunes from all over the world: oil money, political money, corporate money, inherited money, sometimes legal, sometimes deeply questionable, often impossible to fully trace. And over time, Monaco built an entire ecosystem around serving those fortunes. Banks handle hidden assets. Lawyers create complicated offshore structures. Financial advisors build layers of shell companies and private trusts. Real estate agencies sell tiny apartments for prices that would buy entire neighborhoods elsewhere. Everything becomes connected to protecting capital. The apartment itself often doesn't even matter. Many buyers barely live there. The property acts more like a financial tool than a real home. A luxury address becomes a legal shield. That's when the system starts becoming dangerous. Because once an entire country depends almost completely on global wealth protection, normal priorities disappear. The city stops being built for human life and starts being built for financial survival. That's why Monaco feels so unnatural. Every square meter becomes a business opportunity. Developers attack mountainsides and push construction directly into the sea because the system constantly demands more luxury space for more incoming wealth. The city physically cannot stop expanding because expansion is how the machine survives, and the prices become completely disconnected from reality. Tiny apartments cost tens of millions. Parking spaces sell for absurd amounts of money. Developers fight over centimeters of land because the value of real estate no longer reflects comfort or quality of life. It reflects access to the system. The result is a city trapped inside permanent pressure. Traffic grows worse every year. Construction never stops. Tunnels fill with exhaust fumes. Luxury cars crawl through narrow streets at walking speed, while helicopters circle overhead, carrying people desperate to avoid the congestion below. It's almost darkly funny. People spend millions on supercars capable of incredible speeds only to sit trapped in traffic jams inside a tiny, overcrowded city with nowhere to drive. That contradiction perfectly captures Monaco itself. Extreme wealth producing surprisingly miserable daily realities. But the infrastructure problems are only the surface. The deeper problem is psychological. The system transforms human behavior. Once money becomes the central organizing force of an entire environment, people begin measuring themselves entirely through status. The watch matters. The car matters. The yacht matters. The apartment matters. Even social relationships become tied to financial ranking. Nobody wants to fall behind. And among billionaires, the competition becomes insane. A person worth hundreds of millions still feels pressure to prove themselves in front of someone worth billions. That creates a culture of endless comparison where nobody ever feels completely secure. Because in Monaco, wealth is not simply comfort, it's identity. And identities built entirely around money are incredibly fragile. That's why the city feels so tense underneath the luxury. Everyone is performing success constantly. Restaurants become stages, marinas become showrooms, social events become silent status competitions disguised as parties. The emotional atmosphere becomes exhausting. And because the system attracts people obsessed with protecting wealth, fear spreads through everything. Fear of losing money, fear of public exposure, fear of kidnapping, fear of economic collapse, fear of becoming irrelevant. That fear explains the massive security presence across Monaco. Cameras cover nearly every corner. Police patrol constantly. Buildings resemble private fortresses more than homes. The irony is brutal. People move there searching for freedom, but end up living inside one of the most controlled luxury environments on Earth. And the more wealth accumulates, the more control the system demands. Because the entire structure depends on maintaining the illusion of perfect security. If wealthy residents ever stop feeling protected, they leave. And if they leave, the machine begins collapsing immediately. That makes Monaco incredibly vulnerable. Unlike larger economies, the principality has very little underneath its financial image. It doesn't have huge industrial sectors. It doesn't control critical resources. It depends heavily on confidence, prestige, and continuous flows of global capital. That means the system survives mostly on perception. As long as billionaires believe Monaco remains the safest and most prestigious financial refuge, the money keeps flowing. But once confidence weakens, everything becomes unstable very quickly, and the cracks are already visible. International governments are becoming more aggressive about hidden wealth and tax avoidance. Financial transparency rules are tightening. Global regulators increasingly pressure banking systems connected to offshore capital structures. The world is slowly becoming less tolerant of places built around extreme financial secrecy. That creates panic underneath Monaco's polished surface. Because many people inside the system understand the truth. The entire model depends on global loopholes remaining open forever. And loopholes never stay open forever. The principality responds the only way it knows how, by doubling down on image. Formula One races, luxury events, charity galas, environmental campaigns, endless branding designed to preserve Monaco's glamorous reputation. But branding cannot permanently hide structural weakness. At its core, the system remains deeply dependent on inequality. It needs massive global wealth concentration to survive. It needs billionaires searching for financial escape routes. It needs ordinary societies producing enormous fortunes that eventually flow into luxury shelters like Monaco. Without that imbalance, the city loses its purpose. That's why Monaco feels less like a normal country and more like the final stage of extreme capitalism compressed into a tiny physical space. Every contradiction becomes visible there. Unlimited wealth beside emotional emptiness, luxury beside paranoia, security beside isolation, expansion beside suffocation. And the terrifying part is that the system cannot slow down voluntarily, because stopping growth would force Monaco to confront an uncomfortable reality. Beneath all the polished luxury, there is very little genuine stability holding the structure together. It's a city powered by money that constantly needs more money, a machine that survives by feeding on endless global inequality. And systems built like that usually collapse the same way they rise, slowly at first, then all at once. Most people imagine daily life in Monaco as one endless luxury vacation, waking up beside the Mediterranean, drinking coffee on a private terrace under perfect sunlight, driving expensive cars through glamorous streets before ending the night at some exclusive restaurant overlooking the harbor. That's the fantasy sold by movies, magazines, and social media. But the real daily life inside Monaco feels far stranger, far emptier, and far more exhausting than people expect. Because luxury, when it becomes constant, slowly stops feeling luxurious. It starts feeling like pressure. In Monaco, almost every moment becomes part of an invisible performance. The car you drive matters. The clothes you wear matter. The building you live in matters. Even where you eat dinner becomes part of your public identity. People are always watching each other. Who upgraded their yacht? Who bought a new penthouse? Who arrived at the gala with a younger partner? Who got invited onto a billionaire's private boat? Everything quietly turns into competition. And living inside non-stop competition destroys peace of mind. Even simple everyday activities start feeling artificial. Going out for coffee feels less like relaxation and more like entering a luxury showroom. Restaurants resemble business meetings disguised as social gatherings. Conversations circle endlessly around investments, taxes, markets, and status. Very few people talk naturally. Very few people fully relax. The entire city feels emotionally guarded. That emotional exhaustion grows stronger over time because Monaco removes many of the things that make ordinary life meaningful. There's almost no spontaneity, very little unpredictability, very little genuine connection between different kinds of people. Most residents live inside carefully controlled social bubbles. The result is repetitive. Days begin looking identical to each other. wake up late in a silent luxury apartment, drink coffee prepared by staff, meet financial advisors, answer calls about assets or investments, have dinner at the same expensive places, attend another polished social event, repeat everything tomorrow. At first, the comfort feels exciting, then it becomes numbingly empty. That's one of the hidden psychological disasters of extreme wealth. Eventually, the brain adapts to excess. The first Ferrari feels thrilling. The 10th one feels normal. The same happens with yachts, jewelry, luxury hotels, private flights, and exclusive parties. Human beings are not designed to experience non-stop luxury forever. Eventually, the nervous system stops reacting, and when excitement disappears, boredom arrives. Not ordinary boredom, a deep, suffocating kind of boredom that follows people everywhere. That's why Monaco often feels emotionally dead, despite being filled with unimaginable wealth. Many residents spend huge parts of their lives searching desperately for stimulation strong enough to break through the numbness. Some chase endless luxury purchases. Some become obsessed with cosmetic surgery and anti-aging treatments. Some throw absurd parties. Others sink into alcohol, pills, or private psychological crises hidden behind polished public smiles. An entire industry exists there to manage wealthy people's anxiety. Private therapists, life coaches, anti-aging clinics, spiritual gurus, luxury wellness programs, prescription drugs, everything designed to help ultra-rich people survive lives that secretly feel empty. And the most uncomfortable truth is this: many of them achieved exactly what they spent their entire lives chasing, then discovered it wasn't enough. That realization destroys people quietly. Monaco is full of individuals who spent decades building fortunes only to arrive in this tiny luxury bubble and feel completely lost once the chase ended. Because when money becomes unlimited, purpose often disappears with it. There is always another deal, another investment, another property to buy. But eventually, the emotional reward fades. The excitement becomes mechanical. Life turns into maintenance instead of living. That's why so many wealthy residents look strangely tired. Not physically tired, existentially tired. And the city itself amplifies that feeling. Monaco is tiny, crowded, and claustrophobic despite all its wealth. The towers stand packed tightly together. Many apartments worth tens of millions still feel boxed in. Balconies face directly into neighboring buildings. Privacy barely exists. The streets are narrow. Traffic is constant. Construction noise never fully stops. Helicopters thunder overhead. The atmosphere often feels tense and compressed, like a luxury pressure cooker. Even the air feels heavy sometimes from heat, concrete, fuel fumes, and non-stop urban density. That creates a bizarre contradiction. People spend enormous fortunes searching for freedom and comfort, only to end up living inside one of the most crowded luxury environments on Earth. And then there's aging. This is the part nobody shows on Instagram. Monaco is not filled with endlessly young billionaires partying every night. In reality, many residents are elderly people trying desperately to slow down time itself. Extreme wealth usually takes decades to build. By the time many people arrive in Monaco permanently, they are already old, exhausted, and deeply afraid of losing health. That fear hangs over the city constantly. Plastic surgery clinics thrive there. Anti-aging medicine thrives there. Private doctors thrive there. People inject themselves with expensive treatments, swallow endless supplements, and undergo cosmetic procedures, trying to preserve youth for a little longer. But the results often feel disturbing instead of glamorous. Faces become frozen behind surgery. Expressions look artificial. People smile without warmth. The city begins resembling a luxury retirement fortress where billionaires attempt to negotiate with mortality itself. And underneath all the luxury sits enormous loneliness. Many wealthy residents barely trust anyone around them. Relationships become poisoned by money. Children wait for inheritances. Younger partners remain connected through financial agreements. Friends quietly compete against each other. Even family life becomes unstable. Some children grow up emotionally disconnected because they were raised more by staff than by parents. Others inherit unimaginable wealth before developing any real purpose or resilience. They drift through luxury without direction, and the emotional emptiness spreads across generations. Meanwhile, the invisible workforce holding Monaco together lives a completely different reality. Every morning, thousands of workers arrive from France and Italy because they cannot afford to live inside the principality itself. They clean apartments, maintain yachts, serve food, drive luxury cars, and keep the city functioning. Without them, Monaco collapses almost immediately, yet they remain socially invisible. There are effectively two different worlds existing side by side: the ultra-rich inside the luxury bubble, and the workers sustaining the bubble from outside. That imbalance creates quiet tension everywhere. The wealthy depend completely on people they barely notice. The workers spend their lives serving luxury they themselves will never experience, and everybody feels trapped in their role. That's why daily life in Monaco often feels emotionally hollow beneath the polished surface. The city offers comfort without peace, security without trust, luxury without meaning. Everything works perfectly, yet something essential feels missing all the time. Because human beings need more than money to feel alive. They need purpose, they need authenticity, they need real connection. And those are exactly the things Monaco struggles to provide. So behind the yachts, casinos, and billion-dollar apartments, daily life slowly collapses into repetition, isolation, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. The world sees paradise, but many people living there quietly experience something much closer to a beautifully decorated cage. When people look at Monaco from the outside, they usually try to find one simple villain. Some blame the billionaires, others blame the banks, the royal family, or global corporations. But the uncomfortable truth is that Monaco was not created by one greedy person or one corrupt institution. It was built slowly by an entire global system that rewards extreme wealth while separating it from responsibility. Monaco exists because the modern world allowed it to exist. For decades, governments, financial institutions, corporations, luxury brands, and wealthy elites all benefited from the same arrangement. Rich people moved money into protected environments. Banks earned enormous fees. Real estate exploded in value. Luxury businesses made fortunes. Politicians looked away as long as global capital kept flowing. Everybody gained something from the illusion. That's why responsibility is spread everywhere. Of course, the ultra-rich play a massive role. Many fortunes flowing into Monaco were built through aggressive business practices, political influence, financial manipulation, resource extraction, or systems that rewarded profits above everything else. Some wealth came legally, some arrived through darker paths. But once the money entered Monaco, the system treated all of it almost the same way. What mattered was not morality. What mattered was value. That mindset slowly infected the entire culture. Money stopped being a tool for building things and became a shield from consequences. People no longer came searching for community, creativity, or purpose. They came searching for protection. Protection from taxes, protection from instability, protection from governments, protection from ordinary life itself. But wealthy individuals could never maintain that system alone. They needed help from professionals, and that's where the financial world enters the picture. Thousands of highly educated lawyers, accountants, bankers, and financial advisors built careers designing complicated structures to hide wealth, reduce taxes, and protect assets. Entire industries developed around helping the rich legally disappear behind trusts, shell companies, offshore accounts, and private funds. Everything looked polished and legitimate. But the result was often the same: enormous amounts of global wealth escaping public responsibility. Money that could have supported infrastructure, healthcare, schools, scientific research, or social programs instead flowed quietly into luxury shelters designed to protect private fortunes. And everybody inside the system pretended this was simply smart financial planning. That's one of the darkest truths behind Monaco's glamorous image. Part of its luxury exists because resources were pulled away from somewhere else. The yachts, towers, penthouses, and hidden bank accounts did not appear from thin air. They were built from value extracted across the global economy, sometimes from workers, sometimes from struggling countries, sometimes from broken systems that rewarded greed far more than contribution. And yet, the financial world rarely questions where the money truly came from as long as the transactions remain profitable. But responsibility also belongs to governments. For years, many world leaders publicly criticized tax havens while quietly tolerating them in practice. Politicians spoke about fairness and transparency while allowing loopholes large enough for billions to disappear through. It became a strange global performance. Everybody understood the system was distorted, but too many powerful people benefited from keeping it alive. Even popular culture helped build the myth. Movies, luxury advertising, celebrity culture, and social media transformed places like Monaco into symbols of ultimate success. The billionaire lifestyle stopped looking morally complicated and started looking aspirational. People saw yachts, casinos, and penthouses. They did not see the anxiety, isolation, paranoia, and emptiness behind them. The fantasy sold far better than reality ever could. And gradually, society itself became obsessed with the same values Monaco represents: status, exclusivity, wealth accumulation, and visible luxury. That cultural obsession matters, because Monaco is not just a location, it's an idea. The idea that success means escaping ordinary life. The idea that enough money allows people to separate themselves from the struggles faced by everyone else. The idea that wealth can replace community, meaning, and emotional connection. That idea spread far beyond the borders of the principality, and the consequences became visible everywhere. People increasingly measure themselves through possessions, income, followers, luxury experiences, and financial ranking. Entire industries now exist purely to help people appear successful, even if they feel emotionally empty underneath. Monaco simply represents the most extreme version of that mindset, compressed into one tiny place. Even the royal image of Monaco plays a role in maintaining the illusion. The monarchy helped transform the principality into a global luxury brand. Formula One, races, charity galas, glamorous events, environmental campaigns, all of it carefully reinforces the image of sophistication and prestige. But beneath the polished branding sits a far less romantic reality: an economy deeply dependent on attracting global wealth at any cost. Without that money, the illusion weakens immediately. And perhaps the strangest part is that many people inside the system fully understand this already. Bankers understand it. Developers understand it. Residents understand it too. They know the city depends on global inequality. They know much of the wealth surrounding them exists because somewhere else, someone else paid the price. They know the system cannot expand forever. But stopping would require confronting an uncomfortable truth: that they may have spent their lives building something spiritually empty. That's why the machine keeps moving. Because modern capitalism often rewards accumulation without asking deeper questions about purpose, meaning, or consequences. And Monaco became one of the purest examples of that logic. More wealth, more luxury, more protection, more separation from ordinary humanity, until eventually the separation becomes complete. At that point, the city stops feeling like a community and starts feeling like a protected ecosystem for global capital, and everybody inside it becomes trapped in their role. The wealthy remain terrified of losing status. The financial world remains addicted to profit. Governments remain afraid of scaring away investment. Luxury culture keeps selling fantasies. Meanwhile, ordinary people continue watching the spectacle from outside, still believing the illusion represents happiness. That may be the most disturbing part of all, because Monaco survives not only through money, but through belief. The belief that unlimited wealth equals freedom. The belief that luxury equals fulfillment. The belief that escaping society is somehow the highest form of success. But the reality hiding underneath tells a completely different story. A story about fear, isolation, emptiness, and a system so obsessed with protecting wealth that it slowly forgets what human life was supposed to be about in the first place. For a long time, Monaco gave the impression of something permanent, a small but unstoppable fortress of wealth where global money would always feel safe, a place outside normal history, outside normal risk, almost outside consequences themselves. But nothing built on unstable foundations stays permanent forever. And Monaco's foundations were never as solid as they looked. The future of the principality is not a story of stability. It is a slow convergence of pressures that are building in silence. Political pressure, economic pressure, environmental pressure, and cultural pressure. Each one alone is manageable. Together, they become something much more dangerous. The first pressure comes from the global financial system. For decades, the world tolerated offshore zones, secrecy jurisdictions, and tax-friendly microstates because they served a function. They helped move capital efficiently, they attracted investment, and they provided flexibility for global elites. But that tolerance is shrinking. Large economies are no longer willing to accept massive outflows of capital into protected environments with minimal transparency. International cooperation between tax authorities is increasing. Information sharing between banks is expanding. Regulations are becoming tighter, more aggressive, and more coordinated than ever before. The direction is clear: less secrecy, more visibility. And that is a direct threat to Monaco's core identity. Because the principality does not survive on manufacturing, innovation, or natural resources. It survives on one fragile promise: financial discretion combined with prestige. If that promise weakens, everything else becomes unstable very quickly. Luxury alone is not enough to sustain the system. There are many luxurious places in the world. What makes Monaco unique is not beauty or comfort, but its role as a financial shelter. Remove that role, and the entire economic logic starts collapsing. Real estate loses its artificial inflation. Banks lose clients. Legal and financial services shrink. The flow of ultra-wealthy newcomers slows down, and a city built on constant inflow of capital cannot function in stagnation. But financial pressure is only part of the story. A second, slower force is physical reality itself. Monaco is literally trapped between a mountain and the sea. There is almost no space to expand naturally. So for decades, the principality has done something extremely aggressive. It has reshaped its geography. Mountains have been carved, coastal zones have been filled, artificial land has been created. Entire districts exist today on reclaimed space from the Mediterranean. It looks like progress, but it is also a fragile gamble against nature, because the sea does not negotiate. Climate change is gradually altering coastal dynamics across the Mediterranean. Sea levels are rising slowly but steadily. Storms are becoming more intense. Erosion is increasing, and artificial land is significantly more vulnerable than natural coastline. Monaco is extremely exposed, a small territory with dense infrastructure, expensive underground systems, luxury buildings placed close to sea level, and heavy dependence on stable weather conditions. There is very little margin for error, and the more the city expands into the sea, the more it increases its long-term vulnerability. At some point, the same engineering that created new land could become the source of structural weakness. Flooding, saltwater intrusion, infrastructure damage, and storm impact are not distant theoretical risks. They are slow-moving pressures already present along many coastal cities worldwide. Monaco is simply more concentrated, more exposed, and more economically dependent on every square meter of its territory. Then there is a third pressure: cultural decline. The global perception of extreme wealth is changing. For decades, Monaco symbolized success. It represented aspiration, glamour, and achievement. But in recent years, that image has become more complicated. Growing awareness of inequality, environmental damage, tax avoidance, and financial secrecy has shifted how younger generations view ultra-wealth environments. What once looked like success now often looks like excess. What once looked elegant now sometimes looks detached from reality. This shift matters more than it seems, because Monaco is not sustained only by money. It is sustained by desire. People must want to go there. They must want to live there. They must want to display their wealth there. If that desire weakens, the system loses emotional fuel, and cultural perception changes faster than infrastructure. A city can survive economic shocks if its identity remains strong. But if its identity begins to feel outdated or morally uncomfortable, its long-term attractiveness declines. That creates a subtle but powerful risk: symbolic erosion. A fourth pressure comes from geopolitical reality. Global powers are increasingly coordinated in monitoring financial flows. Large-scale tax evasion is no longer viewed as a harmless loophole, but as a structural issue affecting national budgets and political stability. That means jurisdictions like Monaco are no longer operating in a neutral environment. They are operating in a tightening system. The space for secrecy is shrinking. The cost of non-compliance is rising, and the tolerance for hidden wealth is decreasing. In a world of increasing transparency, the comparative advantage of a secrecy-based microeconomy becomes weaker every year. This does not mean Monaco disappears overnight. It means its role slowly becomes less central, less unique, and less powerful. And that erosion can be more dangerous than sudden collapse, because it is easy to ignore until it becomes irreversible. Meanwhile, internally, the system faces another problem: saturation. Monaco is physically small. It cannot expand infinitely. Yet the logic of its economy depends on continuous growth: more residents, more capital, more luxury developments, more financial activity. At some point, physical constraints and economic logic collide. When there is no more space to build, no more land to reclaim, and no more capacity to absorb new inflows without destroying livability, the system begins to strain. Signs of that strain are already visible: congestion, overdevelopment, rising costs, infrastructure pressure, and increasing dependence on artificial expansion projects. It starts to resemble a system pushing against its own biological limits, like a body forced to grow endlessly inside a container that does not expand. Eventually, something has to give. And that brings the final pressure: psychological exhaustion. many ultra-wealthy residents already experience a form of emotional fatigue. The constant surveillance, competition, and isolation create a strange paradox where people who can afford almost anything struggle to feel anything meaningful. Luxury loses its emotional effect. Security creates anxiety instead of comfort. Status competition replaces genuine satisfaction. And over time, the entire environment can start to feel less like a reward and more like a trap. That emotional shift is subtle but important, because systems based on desire can collapse when desire fades. If Monaco stops feeling like a dream destination and starts feeling like a controlled financial enclave with diminishing emotional value, its attractiveness declines even if its infrastructure remains intact. When all of these forces combine, financial tightening, environmental vulnerability, cultural shift, geopolitical pressure, physical saturation, and psychological fatigue, the result is not a sudden explosion. It is something slower, a gradual hollowing out, a weakening of the illusion that once held everything together. At first, nothing dramatic happens. The yachts are still there, the casinos are still open, the towers are still full, the lights still shine over the harbor at night. But underneath the surface, the foundations begin to shift. Money flows change direction, perceptions evolve, costs rise, confidence weakens, and systems that depend on confidence are always the first to feel instability. Monaco does not need a dramatic collapse to change. It only needs a slow loss of relevance in a world that is moving toward transparency, redistribution pressures, climate constraints, and shifting values. And once that process begins, it becomes very difficult to reverse. Because the most fragile part of Monaco is not its buildings or its economy. It is the belief that it will always remain untouchable. And that belief is already starting to erode. In the end, Monaco is not a triumph of modern civilization. It is a warning dressed as success, a carefully polished illusion that convinces the world that extreme wealth equals safety, happiness, and control. But when you look closer, everything starts to feel less like a paradise and more like a fragile construction built on fear, distance, and constant pressure. For decades, people believed Monaco was the final destination of success, the place where winners go, where money solves everything, where life becomes effortless luxury beside the sea. But the deeper reality tells a very different story. Monaco is what happens when money becomes the center of existence. Everything else slowly disappears. Human connection weakens. Nature is pushed away. Space becomes compressed. Privacy becomes artificial. Even time itself feels controlled by routines built around status, appearance, and financial protection. On the surface, everything shines. Luxury cars, super yachts, casinos, perfect buildings, expensive restaurants overlooking the Mediterranean. A constant display of wealth designed to look like happiness. But underneath that surface, something very different is happening. A quiet, emotional collapse. People living inside extreme wealth often discover something unexpected. Once you remove limits, desire loses direction. When everything can be bought, nothing feels meaningful for very long. The brain adapts. Excitement fades. Luxury becomes normal. And normal becomes empty. That is why Monaco is filled with people who appear successful, but often feel strangely tired inside. Not physically tired, emotionally exhausted. They have everything they were told to want, but they no longer know what to want next. So life turns into repetition. More dinners, more deals, more events, more cars, more yachts, more investments, more attempts to recreate a feeling that no longer appears naturally. And slowly, success stops feeling like success. It starts feeling like maintenance. Monaco becomes a place where people try to manage the consequences of having too much rather than enjoy it. Meanwhile, the system itself continues to depend on something much larger than individual lives: global inequality. The entire principality exists because wealth from all over the world flows into it. Money created in different countries, under different conditions, often under very different moral circumstances, eventually converges into this small protected space. That is the hidden foundation of the illusion. Monaco does not produce wealth in a traditional sense. It concentrates it. And that concentration only works as long as the outside world continues to generate enough imbalance to feed it. If global financial systems tighten, if transparency increases, if tax enforcement becomes more coordinated, then the role of Monaco begins to shrink, not instantly, but steadily, like water slowly draining from a sealed container. At the same time, physical reality imposes its own limits. A tiny territory cannot expand forever. Yet Monaco has been expanding aggressively into the sea and up the mountains, trying to overcome geography itself. This creates a paradox. The more it expands, the more artificial and vulnerable it becomes. A city built on reclaimed land is always closer to instability than it appears. And climate pressure does not negotiate with luxury. Rising sea levels, stronger storms, and environmental stress do not care about property values, yachts, or financial prestige. They respond only to physics. And Monaco, sitting directly on the edge of the Mediterranean, has very little space to absorb those forces. So the same sea that once created its beauty can also become its greatest long-term threat. But perhaps the most important collapse is not financial or environmental. It is psychological. Because Monaco is ultimately sustained by belief. The belief that extreme wealth equals meaning. The belief that separation from ordinary life equals success. The belief that money can protect people from consequences indefinitely. Once those beliefs weaken, the structure starts losing its emotional foundation. And without emotional foundation, even the most expensive system becomes fragile. Inside Monaco, many people already live as if they sense this contradiction. There is constant motion, but little real satisfaction. Constant consumption, but diminishing joy. Constant protection, but increasing anxiety. It is a place where everything is optimized except human fulfillment. And that contradiction cannot last forever. At some point, the illusion becomes too heavy to maintain. Globally, attitudes toward extreme wealth are also shifting. What once looked like glamorous success increasingly looks like separation from reality. What once looked like aspiration now often looks like excess. And this cultural shift slowly changes the emotional value of places like Monaco. Because luxury cities do not survive only on infrastructure. They survive on desire. If desire weakens, the system loses its magnetic force. And once that happens, even the brightest symbols begin to fade. Monaco may still physically exist. The buildings will remain. The harbor will still be full of yachts. The casinos will still operate. The lights will still reflect on the water at night. But the meaning behind it all can change. And when meaning changes, everything else follows. The most unsettling truth is that Monaco was never truly built as a permanent solution. It was built as a temporary response to a global financial system that rewards secrecy, concentration of wealth, and inequality. But systems built on imbalance are always unstable in the long run. They grow, they expand, they appear unstoppable. And then they reach a point where the cost of maintaining the illusion becomes too high. Monaco sits very close to that line, not because it will suddenly collapse tomorrow, but because the forces supporting it are slowly shifting beneath its surface. And when those forces change enough, even the most carefully controlled illusion begins to crack. In the end, Monaco is not just a place. It is a mirror, a reflection of what happens when money becomes more important than meaning, when protection replaces freedom, and when success is measured only in numbers rather than in human experience. It shows a world where everything is available, but nothing feels enough. And that is why the final conclusion is not about Monaco alone. It is about the direction of the system that created it. A system that can build extraordinary wealth, but struggles to answer a very simple question. What happens when people finally get everything they were told to want and still feel empty?